Hi, it's time to dive into databases. This is Professor Foat with another JTools Online, and just an introduction to a few of the many databases available to journalists. As we start, let's think about what is a database. Let me pause for a moment while you scribble down your own definition. Here's the one from dictionary.com, and you've actually probably compiled your own database of sports scores or even your notes from a class. Journalists use databases in a number of ways. The most common way is to enhance a story. For example, here's the Boston Globe, who used some data research done right here at Syracuse University at the Transactional Records Access Clearinghouse, or TRAC as we know it. They found out about court cases related to immigration and put that fact in this story. This is the most common way journalists use databases to add a fact or add a statistic to a story. But let me tell you about two other ways. Journalists can find stories by crunching numbers, looking at lots of data, and pulling out certain trends or issues. For example, here's an I-team at a television station in North Carolina that worked with ProPublica to track waiting times in emergency rooms and found out theirs were really quite long. This used to be called computer-assisted reporting, now is often called data journalism. So that's a second way to use databases. And a third way is to provide data online. The media actually publishes data for readers. Here's RockDocs, which is from the Rochester Democrat and Chronicle just down the road. And they have a myriad of databases: real estate, restaurant inspections, unclaimed money. They even do sports ones. And I have included the link here if you want to pause and take a look at the many databases this offers to its readers. I want to pause now and have you check out the data center at syracuse.com because you may find some databases here that could help you enhance your stories. So take a look at what's available and make some notes because your professor might be asking you, what did you find that really could be helpful in a story you're doing this semester? Okay, I hope you thought that was as interesting as I do, and when we talk about these three ways journalists use them, I'm only going to focus on the first way, to enhance stories, and introduce you to databases in 5 different topic areas that you see here on your screen. But first, whenever we're working with data, you need to think about who compiled this. Is it a reputable group? Why did they do this? Is it part of a regular function they do, or is it for some kind of promotional or marketing purposes? How did they collect the data, and is it statistically significant? Does it include everybody? Is it just a person on the street? Where actually did they get the data from? How good a source is that? And what is included in the data? How much can you parse? Really important things to think. We often call it interviewing the data to know what you have before you start. Well, let's start now with demographics, and the U.S. Census is a fabulous source of lots of information that can help journalists. Let me tell you how it works. The decennial survey is every 10 years. Your parents probably remember getting it in the spring, and its prime purpose is a population count for all the congressional apportionments. They fill it out every 10 years and send it back in. But the American Community Survey is sent out every year to a statistically significant group, about 2 million households, and follow-ups are done by phone in person. So the ACS is really where we get a lot of our updated data and can measure changing social and economic characteristics. It's just an estimate, so when you use the ACS, remember to use the 3-year or the 5-year estimates. They're much more accurate than just the 1 years. And be wary of comparing apples to oranges, comparing decennial figures to the ACS. You can find census data on the government's website, census.gov, but I actually find it's much more helpful to use censusreporter.org, which the Knight Foundation funded for journalists for easy, quick ways to find data off the census. And here's an example of both the city of Syracuse and the county of Onondaga, and you can see this is a little more user-friendly and graphically more interesting. Look at home ownership. In the city, 60% of the people rent, whereas in the county, 65% of people own their own homes. So that makes a difference in your coverage. For example, you might pitch, if you were going for city residents, something about landlord-tenant disputes or tenant rights, whereas in the suburbs you might pitch a story more about home repair or mortgages or housing prices. So really, knowing demographics through the census really helps your news judgment. I'm going to have you browse the City of Syracuse and the County of Onondaga's sites off of Census Reporter and see if you might find something interesting that might lead to a story. Okay, I hope you learned a little bit about our community, if nothing else. We've talked about demographics. I want to move now to several government databases that can help you as a reporter. Here's a story that the Post-Standard did about the money that Governor Cuomo has received from Syracuse and Onondaga County, and who are some of the key donors. You can track all kinds of political campaign money in the state through the Attorney General's website or at the federal level through either of these two websites. Let's take a look at the state campaign finance database. Let's say, for example, we want to see, has Jim Boeheim been supporting any state candidates? So you see here I have Boeheim's name, and when we put his name in, we get a whole list of a number of James Boeheims and James Boeheim enterprises. But how do we know that this is the Jim Boeheim, our coach? The first one is on Tiffany Circle in Fayetteville, and if I check that address with his name in whitepages.com, there's a match. And actually, as a second source, I do know, just personally, that that is our coach Jim Boeheim's home address. So that one makes sense. That is probably he. Another way we could just double check that is to look on the Syracuse University Directory Services, suds.syr.edu, and if we put in his name, we see his middle initial is A, and he is a junior, and it says there he's the basketball coach, so that's even a third way of checking this is he. You'll see a number of other James Boeheim enterprises, and those that have the address at Manley Fieldhouse are probably he. But what I find really interesting here is this one on Janes Street, because as best I know, there is no Janes Street in Syracuse. And even if it is James Street, I don't know why he would have a listing at that particular location. So this is a good example of how you always want to be careful and not jump or guess that it is somebody when it may not be that person. And you can see that he has supported, to a small degree, a number of different candidates in state races. So that's an example of people giving donations to candidates for state races. How about the federal races? Let's take a look at Open Secrets. The Federal Elections Commission has a website, but I find Open Secrets a little easier to use. So here's the Open Secrets website, and what if I wanted to figure out who from Jamesville supports Dan Maffei? Maybe I'm looking for donors because I want to interview somebody about Dan Maffei and John Katko congressional race. If I go to the Politics and Elections tab, I get this long list, and if I look at the bottom under Donor Lookup, then this form comes up, and I can put in the donor zip code, the candidate for whom I'm looking, and the election cycle, and I can even rank the results in different ways. And if I'm not as interested in looking at donors, I can also look at the candidates themselves. Again, on the Open Secrets website, if I go to Politicians and Elections and then look for congressional districts, even if I want to find out about Katko, the opponent, it's a little easier to put in the current person, who is Maffei, and I'll get this total raised and spent. This is the report as of June 30. And if you scroll down, you would get the report for his opponent, the Republican John Katko. Also notice for each race, right here where I'm circling, you can find out about contributors, you can find industries that are supporting the candidates, sectors, PACs, and more. Take a pause right now, stop this, and look for which industries and sectors are giving more money right now to John Katko. Okay, I hope that was interesting, and keep notes of all these things because your professor might be asking you for the answers in class. If we wanted to find out more about one of these donors to Katko or to Maffei, I'd like for you to jot down some ways that you think you could use databases or other web resources or the telephone to find out more about these donors. A couple more seconds to think it through. Okay, let me tell you the options that I came up with. You probably know about white pages, so you could certainly look up the names there and find addresses or match the addresses with the database address, and you could give that person a call or go visit. Certainly you can put his or her name in a Google search engine, but you always have to double check and triple check to make sure it's the same person. You could do a media search, for example, using the Syracuse.com Post-Standard database that's at the SU libraries to see if that person's ever been mentioned in a news story, and there might be some more background about him or her. Another option, of course, is LinkedIn, which is a great resource. A lot of times people who are giving to political campaigns are also giving money to charities, and you might find that some of these people are on the boards of foundations or charities. And here's GuideStar, which is a national database of charities and nonprofits. You won't find how much they've given to them, but if they're an active officer, that's another way to check their connections. Okay, let's move on to talk about other government records that are available, and they are housing and property tax records. You might have done this earlier in a class, so this is a little refresher. The City of Syracuse and the County of Onondaga both put their property tax records online. So let's just check out, what if you wanted to see mine? If we go to Onondaga County, and you don't have to log in, but just click here for public access. If you went to my Newhouse bio, you would find that I live in DeWitt, and you could look me up on whitepages.com, and you would find this address, 6305 Hamlet Crest. And if you click Go to the Property, then you'll find my records. It takes a little time, which I've speeded up here. Here's the basic record with information about the property, that I live in a single-family residence, that it's a townhouse. You get the land assessment and the total assessment of property and the building. If you go over here to Owner Sales and click, it does take a while, so be patient, but something like this should come up. And here's my name, and this happens to be my husband. So, how much do we pay for taxes? Now you want to go over here to the tax info, and remember that you have to add the county taxes and the school taxes if people live in the suburbs, or the city and county and school taxes for those in the city. But here's my county tax bill, and it shows the amount that I owe for county taxes, and there's a 4,000 some figure that I owe for school taxes. The property tax info can give you lots of little nuggets to describe the property that could be things you would put into a story, or can also help you know who owns a property that's been the subject of a news story. So browse around here a little bit more and see what you can find. Specifically, I'd like for you to see if you could find the Syracuse mayor. What's her house worth, and how much property tax does she pay? When you've got it figured out, come on back. Okay, I hope you found it. And a tip, did you remember to add the county and the city and the school taxes together? Be sure to do that. Your professor will be asking you for that number. Let's move on to tracking government spending. This is a new website from the governor here in New York, which has all kinds of information about agencies, even includes some federal data. And as you see in the search bar, you can search by city, county, zip code, or subject and find lots of data and information. Two other government spending websites useful here in New York are the one from the Attorney General, the Sunlight NY, and the one from the Controller, Open Book New York. Let's look at this one Sunlight New York first. What about other things that are available? Campaign contributions we've talked about. Look at the other things here, including lobbying and clients. Check this out. Can you find the highest paid lobbyist for Syracuse University in the last 10 years? Go do that now, write it down for your professor, and then come back. Okay, I hope that was interesting. Let's also take a look at Open Book New York. I won't have you go try this out yourself, but if you're interested in the arts or entertainment reporting, under state payments, one of the interesting things I found was the Syracuse Jazz Fest got state money. It got actually $10,000 this year. And the blue underline type will lead you directly to the contract. So it's a way of tracking what government spending in various areas. So you've got 3 different databases. Find a story lead. Tool around in them and see what you can find out. I hope you found something interesting. Sometimes I get lost in these databases. There's so much interesting information and little tidbits of things. But let's move on. We've talked about demographics and government. Let's now look at some business databases that could help you as a journalist. All of the publicly traded companies, their stock is traded on the stock market, have to give certain financial reports so that people who want to buy stock or people that have stock know how they're spending their money and can make good decisions about whether to invest in those companies. So that financial information can be really helpful to us, and you can find it at EDGAR, a Securities and Exchange Commission database. Here's a couple tips from one of the best financial reporters I know, Diane Henriquez. How do you read these reports? Because there are a lot of numbers. Diana says look for a 10K, that's an annual report. And also within those you can often find the compensation for the top executives. For example, let's check out Carroll's, the largest Burger King franchise owner in the world. So if we put in the company name and search, we'll find a whole list of documents. Here's those various numbers that I was telling you that Diana tipped us off to. In that 10K, I actually found the compensation, and you can see it's probably small there, but the president and CEO made a salary of over $500,000, plus got a bonus of $415,000 in 2013, making the total close to $1 million. That's the kind of interesting thing that you can find. Also, 10Qs, 8Ks give you significant changes, and if you go look at one in June or July, you'll see they bought even more restaurants. So EDGAR reports can be helpful for giving you facts, background information, mission, where buildings and offices and services are for companies. Also, you can check charities. If you find somebody's soliciting or you see that little can at the grocery store, is that a legitimate charity? All charities have to register. Again, part of the transparency that our government requires. They have to register with the IRS. And here's an IRS list. There are 823 charities that have a return address of Syracuse, New York. State government also has registration forms that you can check out who a charity is, what its purpose is, where it does business, who's on the board. And there's a couple independent websites that also will give you information, including a new one, Citizen Audit, where you can actually search by term or by keyword. Another really great thing to know is the annual 990 reports that you can get at many of these websites, because they're the ones that will give you the real inside information about these charities. Okay, we've done 3 categories. If you want to now, take a break and come back and we'll do the last 2. Criminal justice records. Everybody asks me, can you get all the records of what's going on in the courthouse downtown? Only some courts in New York State are online, and our county court is not. You can find the Onondaga Supreme Court, which is actually a trial-level county court where all the civil cases are. And I just for fun put in who's been suing Syracuse University. And one of the interesting things I found in July was that Cameron Hill Construction is suing the university, And I presume it's over the building of the bookstore there across from Marshall Square Mall, right next to the parking garage. There's quite a dispute about that. The other important criminal justice records that you want to know about are the U.S. Department of Justice UCRs, or the Uniform Crime Reports. Every police agency is required to report these particular crimes to the federal government, and then they're all compiled. So we have a massive database that we can look at and compare. I'd like for you to stop right now, click on the link on the website, and compare the violent crime in Syracuse to Rochester and see who's got more crime. Well, if you did those comparisons, the last year I found was 2012, and here are the number of violent crimes in Syracuse compared to Rochester. So you would think Rochester is a lot worse, but actually the populations are different. So if you look at it based on population, you'll find these differences, and yes, Rochester is still a little bit ahead. When working with UCRs, I've learned some valuable lessons that you really have to know what this data is before you use it, because you can use it improperly in a news story. So, could you just put in a story, this is the number of burglaries in Syracuse? Probably not, because it's only reported burglaries. And, if a drug dealer's home is burglarized, they might not be likely to report that to police. So remember, it's only reported crime. And of course, when it comes to rape, we know that many people are hesitant to report that. Here's another tip I learned from my time in Detroit. We found that the number of suspicious fires, according to fire department records, was way up, but the number of arsons in the UCR reports was down from the previous years. And we wondered how that could be. And when we got checking, we found that a fire can only be labeled an arson if it's been checked out. And the Detroit Fire Department didn't have enough investigators to check out the suspicious fires, so they never checked them, so they couldn't say they were or weren't an arson. So it was really not a factor that the number of arsons had gone down, but it was really a factor that they didn't have enough investigators to check those suspicious fires and find out if they're arsons. So again, just another reason for always being careful with your data and knowing what it says. Okay, we've been through some criminal justice databases. Let's do one fun one, and that's in the area of transportation. There's a website called Landings, which tracks lots of different things about airlines and airplanes and pilots. One of the things I learned in my work also in Detroit was if there ever is a plane crash, the first person on the scene, whether it's a reporter, photog, or whoever, even somebody on the phone, try to get the tail number of the plane, because that way we can track a lot of information about the plane. So if you go to Landings and you clicked on databases and U.S. registrations, you can find who owns a plane. Let's say there was a mythical plane crash and you got this number, 22153. Plug it into the database here and see who owns that plane. And I trust you found that was locally owned. Well, all the databases I've shown you are just a beginning of all kinds of databases that are out there. And remember, not only can you use them to enhance your stories, but if you get into some kind of data journalism, you can find stories in the data, and you might be at a news organization that actually puts data online for its readers, viewers, and listeners. If you like this kind of stuff, you might consider taking the data journalism course that Dan Pacheco is offering. This is a whole new area of data journalism. It's really becoming a specialty. And you also might want to look at some of the training offered by Investigative Reporters and Editors, which is a great organization and has great training opportunities. I hope you found this helpful. I hope it helps your reporting. And if you have any questions, please feel free to email me and just put JTools in the memo line so I'll know to get back to you.